Hi, and welcome to Mishlei. This should be the last class of this kind of ongoing series for the last couple of years. And then I think Justin Becker's Delight will continue with verse 7 and a whole new set of Mishlei. What do you think about that, Justin Becker? All right, we've done a proper introduction. I think so. And let's go. So again, this is kind of the anticlimactic end. Last week we were off the record, really learning how to read the English because it explains the Hebrew. And Jacques, pay attention, Jacques type 1. Jacques type 1. If Jacques was with us, he would type 1, everybody. I do believe that. I believe that wholeheartedly. There he is. To understand a proverb, Jacques. To understand a proverb. Lehavin mashal. Jacques type 1. Lehavin mashal. To understand a proverb, we're going to look up what mashal means in English, which apparently means anywhere from parable, witty saying, or comparison. Now, Jacques, are you with me? The dark sayings. Do you see where it says dark sayings? Type 1. Everybody type 1 with me. Dark sayings, type 1. That is actually melitza. Okay? So when the Hebrew reads mashal u'melitza divrei chachamim v'chidosam, what we're saying, Jacques, is this. To understand a proverb, lehavin mashal. Now, in the English, you skip to the words of the sages and their interpretations, and the interpretation, the words of the wise. Do you see that? So what we're saying is that the rabbis will explain the mashal. To understand the mashal, type 1. Type 1. Not only are the rabbis explaining the understanding of the mashal, but their dark sayings as well. Okay, Jacques Kotzi, I'm talking to you. We talked about this off the record. Does this make sense? To understand a proverb, lahavin mashal, the very next words, in the interpretation, the words of the wise, that is translated as the words of the sages and their interpretations. Or if you want to call it their enigma, epigram, trap, or snare. 1 or 2. 1 or 2. Then, and their dark sayings, goes back to melitza. Another way of saying it is to understand, follow along. Everyone follow along with how I'm going to jump here. Ready? To understand a proverb and their dark sayings, mashal and melitza, we need the words of the wise and their interpretation. That's how you would read that linearly. Jacques, I get a big 1 or a big 2? A big 1 or a big 2? Good. So why is the English convoluted? The answer is because the Hebrew is convoluted. If you didn't notice, Hebrew is not English. And Hebrew is always, not always, but I think always, maybe majority, whatever, written non-linear like English. So what Solomon is saying is, lavin mashal, to understand mashal and melitza, divrei chachamim v'chidosam. So to understand the mashal, and the rabbis wrote their riddles derived from the dark sayings, so that we would understand the dark sayings, which is the panemius, the inner level of the mashal, and the mushal itself. The reason why this is confusing is because there's layers upon layers upon layers. You understand that? The Torah is a mushal. And King Solomon says, I don't understand how to understand the Torah. So he figured out, if I write a bunch of mushal, parables, then I will understand. And what he found out was that he mushled to find the Melitza, and then his own words, as he was a rabbi, so to speak, right, became, let's turn that off. His own words became enigmatic and riddles simply to understand the analogy or the parable and the inner dimension. You see, there's a lot of ways to take it. That's why this is confusing. The understanding man shall acquire wise counsel to understand an allegory and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. Yeah, that makes sense what Justin Becker just typed. Let me just read this again in my own mind. To understand a proverb, lahavin mashal. Right, you should have like a colon or semicolon after mashal. Lahavin mashal. That's why we're doing this, right? To understand the mashal. Umelitza, and the panemius of the mashal gave birth to words of the rabbis and their riddles. So you see, to understand a proverb and the interpretation of the wise and their dark sayings. That's right. The rabbis are derivative out of the dark sayings, which is the melitza, which is a derivative out of the mashal. So you have the mashal, which gives rise to the melitza. The melitza gives rise to the words of the rabbis. Words of the rabbis becomes a riddle of its own self. So the rabbis' words are now a new type of mashal, and their panemius are their riddles, and they are talking about the nimshal to the Torah itself, the melitza, which is a caps. Excuse me. Which is the panemius of the mashal. That includes part of the last verse. Who is wise counsel? Who is wise counsel? You mean the tachbulot? You mean the tachbulot? Remember, tachbulot is strategy. Call that strategy. How to always gain insight. So the wise man, the chacham, will hear and gather teachings, and the navon, he who hears the matter in the matter, will acquire strategies of understanding to understand mashal. Exactly like Justin said. Keep it to run on sentence, Jacques. Number 5 and number 6 running together. The wise man will hear to gain the teachings. The man who understands the matter of the matter will acquire strategy of how to gain understanding in order to understand the mashal. All of this is to understand the mashal. And as he does that, he's gonna gain the nimshal. And the nimshal, which is the analogous thing to the analogy, is going to give rise to explanations, and the explanations carry riddles. I think every wisdom in the world has this paradigm. Am I right? Everything has this riddle, pun intended. When there's a mashal, the thing that you're trying to understand, type 1. There's always a mashal. A mashal is everything in your life that God is doing to you with mazel. You're trying to understand what God is doing. That's called a mashal. You can call it again in English, the parable, the witty saying, the comparison. And all you want to do is understand that. You're trying to gain smarter to understand that. And then there's that mashal has meaning, malitza. And then you call your friends, and your friends tell you what you want to hear, right? You all have problems with your friends, right? You call them, and you say, why is Bob mean to me? Everyone type 1 for nasty Bob, right? Bob is mean. Poor Bob. He's mean to us. And you call your friend, why is Bob mean? So God gave you an analogy called Bob, the mashal. Type 1 for Bob. Type 1 for Bob. And then you say, but it can't just be Bob. It's got to be that Bob represents, is it the ex-husband, the ex-boyfriend, the ex-boss, the obnoxious next-door neighbor? Which one is Bob? Everyone type 1. Which one is Bob? Is Bob like my little brother program coming at me again? Is it Mr. Johnson, the 7th grade science teacher? Who is it? I don't like Bob, but there's something about Bob I need to know, right? You call your friend Marcy. You call Marcy. Marcy, what is it about Bob? And Marcy says, Bob is one of those egotistical guys. Type 1 for Bob, one of those egotistical guys. So now you weren't even thinking like Marcy, and you're trying to think, what does Marcy's riddle or interpretation mean? Right? You called Marcy because Marcy's wise. Type 1. Type 1. And now Marcy said he's one of those egotistical guys. But you're saying to yourself, what's the riddle? What does it mean? What's the enigma? What's the epigram? What's the trap? I don't know what these words mean. We're going to look them up. Right? So now you got to figure out Marcy's riddle. Then there's Marcy's words. And she's trying to tell you the panemius, or the nimshal, the analogous thing about Bob, right? If Bob is the next door neighbor, is he really an egomaniac too? And it's just Bob is one of them? And it's all based on this mashal called, there's this guy named Bob that we don't like. And all of my wisdom and experience in life is giving me understanding so that I can quickly understand things. Now, let's say you want to take away the antagonistic approach, right? You're training for a new job. Type 1 because you're training for a new job. And Bob is just some guy. He's your boss. Let's give it kind of a personal anecdote here. I remember when I was the manager at the coffee shop in Cleveland before I made Aliyah, right? Everyone with me in the coffee shop? And young Rabbi David Katz, who wasn't even a rabbi at the time, he is a young scholar trying to listen to gain teachings of how to froth cappuccino, and he's gaining understanding the matter because Rabbi Katz is going to go to Israel one day and make something of himself. Type 1. And he's trying to get good at the job so that he can learn how to make coffee much to his customers' delight. Type 1. Basically, I don't want to look stupid when people order coffee and they use jargon and things like that. I want to know what's going on. Can you imagine the headspace of 22-year-old Rabbi David Katz? Right? We've all been there. We've all had that job. You're young and on the job. You want to be able to perform. Basically, that you want to become cognitive, right? You want to become competent. You want to be able to understand. Because what's the problem with a new job? You don't understand anything. I remember my first day, they had the coffee grounds. We had to knock into the bin. We had to know how to, have you ever seen the coffee shop work? You got to put like the handle thing where you put the grains in into the machine. It's a whole wisdom making coffee. Type 1 for the wisdom of making coffee. Right? And you gotta understand what to do. You don't want to mess up people's coffee at 6 a.m. You really don't. So we're gonna have. I'll give you an example. In the building, I worked at the Jewish Community Center for the coffee. Justin, what's the 2? What's the 2? What's the 2? What's the 2? Exactly. Okay. So it was the building of the Jewish Community Center, and we had catering that we had to put out also at 6 a.m. Do you want to put out catering at 6 a.m? Do any of you want to wake up at 5 to be at work at 6 to put out catering with meetings starting? It's not fun. It's really not fun. So you have to understand what's going on. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. Can I get a big 1? For it is necessary to understand and have cognitive prowess on the job at 6 a.m. All right, good. Now you're going to come across a lot of mashal, parable. Here's a parable. You're a stupid 22-year-old kid, type 1. We were all there. And they're going to say, come on, David, you got to learn how to work hard at 6 in the morning. Everyone, can you all hear that? Come on, David, you got to learn how to work hard at 6 in the morning. Type 1. That's called a mushal. That's a mushal. Because it's a lafim shuto saying, I get it. Okay, you got to work hard. But how come they all got to keep telling me, come on, David, you got to work hard. I'm working hard. It's 6 in the morning, and I'm making coffee. What is there not hard about this situation? Now, objective Rabbi Katz, who's turning 39 this week, will look back on young David Katz and say, David Katz, you weren't working hard. Working hard means, guess what, David? You know those 6 caterings that have to go out by 7 in the morning between the hours of 6 to 7? That's a 1-hour block. Guess what the percentage rate of failure is? Does everyone know what the acceptable percentage rate of failure was to young David Katz on the job back then? What percentage was I allowed to fail on? 0%. What did David Katz think the percentage of failure was? What was I allowed to fail on? Basically, if someone, what amount of caterings possibly couldn't have to go out to young David Katz? I'd say we're calling it 50-50. I was actually okay with maybe they were going to call in sick every morning. Maybe they're going to call in sick. Maybe they made a mistake and they really don't want all this coffee and pastries and bagels, right? It could happen. Couldn't it happen? Maybe. And they kept saying, come on, David, just got to work hard. I was saying, come on, why do I have to work that hard? It could be that they canceled. Cleveland has a lot of snow. Could be they got snowed in. Okay, it's July, but you never know. The lake effect is strong. You never know what's going to happen. Type 1. So I got the mushal. I mean, what really is going on is God's mushal is very hard, right? You don't even know what hard working is until you figure out what it is to work hard. Type 1. You have no idea. And everyone that's grown up around you is saying work hard. You think working hard is doing bench press in the weight room of high school. That's what working hard was to me. I don't know about this stuff. So now, if you would really meditate on the job, you would realize there's an inner dimension of what they were saying, right? They were saying, David, get this delusion out of your brain that they're not going to come through. We need 6 caterings out by 7 o'clock. That's non-negotiable. If you would just knock it out, like you knock out a Rashi Tosfos, then 5 years from now, you'll be fine. There'll be no problems. If you knock out Rashi Tosfos like you do on this coffee run, you will be the master of Arabica Coffee House. Type 1. Type 1. So, Lamaisa, I didn't get the Melitza, did I? I had no idea what the analogous thing was, right? All I got was the analogy because I didn't understand it. If I would have understood it, or let's say by the time I left my job 2 years later, I did understand it. And I started to understand the mushal, right? The mushal is go to work, 5 in the morning, coffee house, work hard, work really hard, and then the slam is over by 10 in the morning, and then you can chill the rest of the time until it's time to go home, right? Did young David Katz get the mushal eventually? Yes, he did. He became the manager of the store, and it was I learned how to work hard. Type 1. But because I understood that the percentage of them not getting their coffee was actually 0, I had to go in my mind from 50% to 0%, right? Just like in basketball. I imagine NBA players, for me, I would be happy if I just hit the rim or backboard these days, right? Can you all relate to that? But in professional ranks, I'm sure you got to hit it 90% of the time. You have to expect to hit it 90% of the time. All right, so now the Divrei Chachamim, the words of the sages, when I would tell, let's say, another employee, wow, why do they want us to get the catering out on time? Can you imagine that statement? We're talking to the manager now, not the owner of the store, and we say, wow, Bob is really mean. How come he wants me to work so hard? Can you imagine that statement? 1 or 2, 1 or 2, 1 or 2, 1 or 2. Then the manager says, well, sometimes the people in charge got to do what they got to do. Can you imagine that being said? Well, sometimes the people in charge have got to do what they've got to do. So now I don't understand God. I don't understand my previous studies. I don't understand what God wants from me from those that are superior to me. And when I ask my rabbi friends, i.e. the peers on the job, they tell me even more complicated things because they understood the mashal. Did the manager understand the mashal? Did the manager understand that, hey, we got to get the caterings out? I'm just not as power hungry as the owner here, but I'm the manager. I'm kind of power hungry. I'm kind of cool. So I'll just tell you a very enigmatic little way of saying, hey, man, you got to work hard if you want to keep the job. All right, end of little analogous story here. Can you relate to my story? Can everyone relate to my story? All right, so we see the components in the story, right? You had the ability, good to see you, Edo. You had the ability to learn and have a cognitive experience, correct? You're learning, you're finding things out, like anything in this world, correct? One or two. Then God gives you the musar. He gives you the analogy, which is people's, as Russell would say, gevurot. God clocks you over the head. How many of you have ever been clocked over the head with a little bit of life? A life clop, type 1. When you get the life clop, then you have to understand what is the meaning of the life clop. Then you ask your rabbinic friends, and they just give you riddles. All right, I call that in my life calling Chaim. That's what I call Chaim, and I get my life riddle. All right, so you understand it, right? Mashal, we want to understand life so we don't get clocked. When we get clocked, we look for the meaning. We call our friends to help us with meaning. Our friends give us riddles. Then we go and we make our own analogies. We talk to our friends, which we create and conjure up life-clopping things. And then we understand the innards. And then we understand what the rabbi said, or our friends said, our peers said, the experts said. And then we understand their riddles. All right. Let's go into the English. And by the way, let's just read it one more time through. Okay, Jacques, you with me? To understand a proverb, Jacques, call the proverb the life clop. Does everybody understand? You only want to learn Torah so that you can have the power in mind to understand the life clop, which is a proverb, right? Don't count your chickens till the cows come home, or whatever they say, right? They say those things because once upon a time, those things meant something in the wisdom of life. Type 1. Don't count your blessings till their chickens are hatched. Whatever these things do. All right, so you have your life message, life clop, life blah, blah, blah. And what you want is someone to explain to you the birds and the bees of life. So the interpretation, the words of the wise. When life hits you, you want to call your friends and you want them to interpret this to you. Then if you make it to your friends, your friends will make you realize that they're not explaining to you the mashal because they're not you. Your friends are explaining the thing that they can relate to, the dark sayings. Oh, I had a egomaniac boss once. Yes, he was very difficult to work for. You should try just doing what he says. What is your friend, the rabbi, saying through their interpretation? They're saying the dark saying is bosses are demanding and you got to work hard. Type 1. That's a dark saying, words of the wise in their interpretation, all to understand the proverb, why is my boss so hard on me? Because that's called the life clop. It's called bosses are hard. All right? I think we're good? I think we're good. You think we're good? So now, let's go into the Anglit. Let's go into the Anglit, and we're going to look up parable. Jacques, do you know what a parable is? Jacques, do you know what a parable is? I don't know what a parable is. Hope you guys don't know what one is either. Hold on. Did a little thing here. All right, here we go. We're going to find out what a parable is. You guys want to find out what a parable is? Everyone go to the link. right? Remember, parable is the mashal. Have that in mind. The mashal is the Torah itself. It's the verses themselves. It's straight up the thing that comes to you from God. It's called, why is there the bad boss? Why are terrible twos terrible twos? Why do people steal stuff from my car? Why is the rain raining today and not the sun shining? Does everyone relate to the proverb? The life clock? Everyone. 1, 2, 1, 2. All right. Specifically, example, a usually short, fictitious story that illustrates a moral attitude or a religious principle. Okay, well, Justin, see you later, Broccoli. Well, Justin, you got to work hard, boy. Right? Justin, give me a big old one there. Well, Jacques, the youngsters today don't have the work ethic like the old folk. What do you think, Jacques? 1 or 2? So this is where people have their own little religious code. And when you transgress people's religious code, then it becomes sacrilegious. So everyone's got their example, specifically. A usually short, fictitious story that illustrates a moral attitude, right? Hey, boss, I really don't want to put out the coffee today. Well, David, Michael Jordan didn't want to shoot 5,000 free throws, but you know what happened then, right? Type 1. What is the boss doing? He's giving you the little parable that gives a moral attitude or his personal religious principle to get me to do what he wants me to do. All right? So everyone understand the mashal, which is the parable. I think dogma is when I'll tell you what dogma is, Edo. All right, you got the boss Bob, right? Everyone type 1 for the boss Bob. Edo, type 1. And Bob had, let's say, 5 jobs, Edo. He was the manager of a restaurant in 5 different restaurants, okay? Because that's what restaurant managers do. They just keep going on and on and on. So guess what he would tell every one of the places that he worked for? Well, everybody, the secret to a great restaurant is having a great work ethic. Guess what Bob told the very next restaurant that he worked for? Edo, any guesses? Any guesses what Bob told the very next restaurant that he worked for? Same thing. He went everywhere he goes. Well, the secret to a great restaurant is a great work ethic. That was now a dogma. He's going to be telling this to the day he dies. Right? He has his religious code. So you work for Bob, you better have a good work ethic. Am I right or wrong? Because if you don't, he's going to be complaining about you all the time. Well, you didn't have the right work ethic. Guess what happens when I get hired for Bob? And I say, well, Bob, I want to work for you because I have a great work ethic. Well, what will Bob's response to me be? Well, that's the secret of a great restaurant. All right, so we got Bob. Now, there's another word we can say. That's a comparison. Let's find out what the word comparison means. Let's find out what the word comparison means. The act or process of comparing, such as the representing of one thing. Okay, right. So identity of features, similarity. Why do I have to get the coffee out in time? Well, David, did you ever think that the bat boys in the baseball stadium, that they would delay in putting the bats out for the ball players? Let's go. Let's get the catering out for the morning breakfast. Right? So you just make a comparison. You don't understand life clop A, type 1, Jock. Life clop A, you don't understand. So you come to your rabbi friend who's your peer, and he says, well, Jacques, it's like life clop B. Right? Why are workers so lazy? Well, it's an epidemic in the world today, Jacques. Even the every how would you say it? All workers today, Jacques. It's not just you. All workers are lazy today. So what am I saying? I'm making a comparison. Right? I'm giving you're presenting your mushal to me, and I'm presenting my mushal to you. All right? That's called the mushal. Now let's find out what a melitza is. Or better yet, let's find out, melitza, that's right. Allegory. Find out what an allegory is. I don't know what it is. I hope you don't either. You guys know what an allegory is? Anyone? Does anyone know what an allegory is? All right, remember, the allegory is the thing that you want. It's the analogous thing in the analogy. So there's the analogy. I want to find out what analogy is. Hold on. Analogy. They didn't give that word analogy. I want to see if we're translating mushal correctly as an analogy. An inference that if two or more things agree with one another, no, resemblance in some particular between things, similarity. Okay, it's a comparison. All right, so the better word for comparison is analogy. Got it. Inference that if two or more things agree, got it. Okay, so the mushal is the analogy. Let me write that down in my notes. So there's the analogy and the allegory. Analogy. Hold on, I want to see real quick also, what is a metaphor? Justin Becker, do you know what a metaphor is? Let's see what a metaphor is. A figure of speech in which a word or phrase literally denoted one kind of object or idea is used in place of another to suggest a likeness or analogy between them, as in drowning in money. An object, activity, or idea treated as a metaphor, a symbol. So Donald Trump is money. Type 1. Donald Trump is money. Type 1. That's a metaphor. Right? That's a metaphor. So it looks like the metaphor, figure of speech in which a word or phrase literally denoting one kind of object or idea is used in place of another, just to like this or analogy between them. Okay, so basically the analogy and the metaphor are two kinds of mushal. One's more direct, one is not so direct. Now let's look up what an allegory is. We don't know what an allegory is. The expression by means of symbolic, fictional figures and actions of truths or generalizations about human existence. A writer known for his use of allegory, an instance of such expression, the poem is an allegory of love and jealousy, a symbolic representation. Okay, symbolic representation. So that's the melitza. So Donald Trump is money. That's an analogy and a metaphor, right? Then what I'm implying in my allegory is that America is being run by money, right? Can everyone follow my thinking? If you say, hey, Rabbi Katz, what do you think about the news today? And I say, well, Donald Trump is money. What did I do? I made a metaphor or an analogy, right? And what I'm conveying to you is the allegory that American institutions are corrupt and run by money. Can you follow that? So when everyone is bickering about Donald Trump today, what they're saying is Donald Trump is money, Donald Trump is Melania, Donald Trump is the airplane, Donald Trump is the hairdo. But what we're really trying to find out is, what does it mean? What is the allegory? There's an allegory going on. Can you guys give me a 1 or 2 on that? It definitely means something. What does it mean? right? Again, your analogy and your metaphor are obvious. That's obvious. When you give the obvious analogy or metaphor, you're looking for the allegory. So when life hits you, Donald Trump is money, and we call Jacques and we say, Jacques, what does it mean? It means that I don't understand the allegory, and I want the allegory, and I call the word on the words of the wise, those that understand the mushal and the melitza type one, Jacques, and then they give me their interpretation. And their interpretation would be, we're going to look that word up here in a minute, would be, well, Rabbi Katz, politics are all corrupt, and that's how the world is run. So Donald Trump is money means corrupt politics. That would mean that the Donald Trump is money mushal analogy metaphor, and the allegory is corrupt politics, and the riddle, the interpretation of the words of the wise is he would understand the mushal, and he would actually create a new allegory, which is the riddle of the wise, that politics are corrupt. Now, what you see is A equals B. How would you say this? A equals B. How would you say that? Whatever it is, Jacques' answer didn't equal my answer. You see that? Jacques' mushal didn't equal my mushal. You understand that? I said Donald Trump is money. Jacques said politics are corrupt. So one person reads it one way, another person reads it another way. Now I need to understand Jacques' riddle. I still don't understand God's riddle through Donald Trump, and we're trying to figure out the superconscious position of the allegory. Do you understand my thinking here? Does everyone understand my personal analogy and metaphor? One or two? Meaning, whatever you're struggling with, whatever you struggle with in Torah and in life, you're struggling with the analogy, right? Because you're trying to figure out the allegory. What does it mean? When you are looking for meaning and you call your friends give an interpretation, and their interpretation is different than the meaning that you were looking for. Now you need to understand their interpretation and see if it jives with what you thought maybe it meant, and does it go back to the original meaning of the analogy or the metaphor. The entire Torah is this process. This is called rabbinics. Now let's look up the enigma. I'll tell you why, Jacques, what you said in this little fictitious story of mine, why is it an enigma? Politics are corrupt. Because the person that doesn't understand Donald Trump is money doesn't want to hear that politics are corrupt. He wants to hear that the person that he voted for was a noble statesman, type 1. No, Jacques, politics isn't corrupt. I voted for the right candidate, and he's going to bring about change. So now Jacques' answer becomes an enigma. You see how it's an enigma? Why is the sky blue? What does it mean? I'm looking for some kind of thing that God created the heavens like an ocean. And Jacques says the sky is blue because it's a product of radiation, global radiation. And I say, huh? How do you get global radiation to answering the question why the sky is blue? Or a different shade of blue? I thought maybe God was changing the heavens. And now you're telling me it's some nuclear reactor fallout? So now it becomes an enigma. You see how it's an enigma? Everything's an enigma. Whenever you ask your friends for the interpretation to the deeper meaning, to the thing that you wanted the meaning to, they're not you. They're not biased like you. They're not invested like you. They're going to give their interpretation from their wisdom based on what you said. So now it's going to become an enigma. But because God is in them and God is in you, you need to find the superconscious position in their interpretation back to you and see, why did God answer you through this person in that way? Enigma? How many of you know what an enigma even is? if you ask a friend what blue is, all they can do is point to something blue, which is an analogy. Right, but that analogy will become an enigmatic thing. It's not what you were describing. It's not the kind of blue you were thinking about. So now it becomes an enigma. What do you mean by that? What do you mean that's blue? Okay, enigma. An obscure speech or writing, something hard to understand or explain, an inscrutable or mysterious person. There you go. There you go. There you go. We're going to close with that. Everybody, I think we have really done good work here. I hope you agree. We've shown how if the Torah is the philosophy of life, the Torah is written with mashal. In the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. Well, it means something. Go ask your friends what it means. They will answer with words of wisdom, which is none other than an interpretation. That interpretation is an enigma because it's not what you were thinking. Now you need to understand the enigma interpretation, the words of the wise. Does it equal the right allegory? And does it shed light on the analogy and the metaphor? And the Torah comes with a superconscious position so that when you speak Torah, you don't need to say, no, Justin, you're wrong because your enigma is different than mine. We listen to each other, and what we find through Mazel is that Justin's enigma and I am an enigma to him. When we listen to each other's enigmatic statements, we both come together to understand the allegory in any analogous or metaphoric inyan. You understand what I'm saying, Jacques? Two people struggle over God's ways. You want to understand God's ways? Listen to me here. Jacques, do you want to understand God's ways? One or two. I also want to understand God's ways. One or two. One or two. One. Hello. So now when you are struggling with God, Jacques, you're struggling with God's metaphor and analogy, type 1. You're saying, God is giving me something, but I don't know what it is. And I'm saying, God is giving me something, and I don't know what it is. Jacques, are you looking for meaning? Type 1. I'm looking for meaning too. I mean that as a 1. So, Jacques, you might call me. You might call me to add and tell me what the parable is, right? And then you're calling your wise-worded friend who gives you his interpretation, and all of a sudden my interpretation's not what you were thinking. I say, oh, Jacques, that's like Rashi Tosfos. And Jacques, you weren't thinking Rashi Tosfos. So when I say it's Rashi Tosfos, you say, how do you get that? I was asking you why youngsters don't work hard, and you told me it's a product of Rashi Tosfos. So now you have your analogy. You're looking for the allegory. You ran into an enigma. Exactly. You need the tachpulot to tie it together. So then you talk to me about your analogy, and then you start to show me all the analogies that I don't know, trying to understand my enigma, and now you become an enigmatic person to me. Because now I'm using you to solve my analogies, and now you're presenting an unknown allegory to me, trying to explain your position, and you're enigmatic. So we get the tachpulot, the strategy to work together, and we start to become unenigmatic, Jacques type 1, and we start to realize that we share the same analogy in common, and then we start to get insight to the allegory, which you could call that the meaning of life. You understand? You struggle with life, and then you go looking for help. The help, it becomes enigmatic, and then only when the two minds come together to form a superconscious position, you start to unite the analogies together and the enigmas together, and you get insight to the allegory, which is the building blocks of life. Torah is the same way. You struggle for pshat, you call your friend, he tells you something that you never even thought of, that becomes an enigma. Then you tell him what you were thinking, and now you become the enigma. And then when you're both enigmatic, you come to terms, you start to realize the allegory, you start to find the unity between the two of you, and then you understand the analogy of what the Torah was trying to say. Right? This is not a linear exercise shop. This is the never-ending, ongoing process. Everyone see? Meaning, just try to understand how the process works. King Solomon's telling you the process. He himself doesn't understand the Torah. So what does he do? He makes mashal. He makes analogies. And then he creates words of the wise and their interpretations. It's like a never-ending, ongoing story. Thank you for listening. God willing, in the new yeshiva, I know I've said this 1,000 times. I hope I mean it this time. I know we're close. But we'll start verse number 7, chapter 1 in Mishlei, which according to the Gaon of Vilna, this is the real beginning of the book. Everything until now was an introduction. Thank you.